everybody, Pandi here.
Hey everybody, Pandi here of Pandi's Hair, Candy, and More. If this is your first time stopping by my channel, welcome. If we are already chat family, welcome back. You all, I am hopping on with a little bit of trending recap news. Just wanted to touch on a story that I caught last night on 60 Minutes that I found very intriguing. You know, it always intrigues me when I haven't seen it or I haven't heard of it, I get intrigued. So, let me do this the right way, y'all. Welcome if this is your first time stopping by. Welcome back if we are already family. For the most part, my channel is based on hair, both natural hair care as well as wigs. I also offer product reviews, hauls, TV show reviews, movie reviews, trending recaps, game nights, and just general commentary. So, this particular segment is going to be a mini version of my edited trending recap series because, like I said, it's only dealing with one particular story that definitely, in my mind and in my opinion, is a trending story. However, I feel like there was not really a lot of light being shined on it because even after I watched last night's episode on 60 Minutes, y'all, I went back and I started Googling and researching it because I was so surprised because, yeah, I haven't been watching a lot of TV lately, even during the pandemic, because I've been trying to be on YouTube and on other social media platforms trying to create content, but I found it very odd that I wasn't very familiar with this story. So, some of you all might be like me. So you already know what that means. I'm going to come through and just drop a little bit of tea on the story and see what you all's thoughts are. See if you guys are familiar with the story. If so, what are your thoughts? Feel free to drop down in the comments below and leave your feedback, questions, or suggestions, and we can pretty much play it from there. So this story is on none other than Curtis Flowers. Mr. Curtis Flowers has been apparently tried 6 times for the same crime, but he was recently saved from death row. Okay? Basically, after 6 murder trials and nearly 24 years, charges have now been dropped against Curtis Flowers. Now, Mr. Flowers had faced the possibility of a 7th trial in the quadruple murder case from Mississippi. 6 times prosecutors took Curtis Flowers, a black Mississippi resident, to trial on the same murder case before a mostly white jury, and 6 times the trials ended with convictions that were later reversed or ended with mistrials. Now, just recently, apparently, I want to say last year, I can't remember the exact date, I think they said either September or November of last year, 2 decades after prosecutors began pursuing murder charges against Mr. Flowers, they announced that they were dropping the case. And in a memo seeking dismissal of the charges, prosecutors from the Mississippi Attorney General's office wrote that, quote, "It is in the interest of justice that the state will not seek an unprecedented 7th trial of Mr. Flowers." Mr. Flowers, who is now 50 years old, said in a statement issued by his lawyers that he had never given up on the idea that the case would one day be over. Quote, "Today I am finally free from the injustice that left me locked in a box for over 23 years, said Mr. Flowers, who was released from custody on bail last year. Now, Mr. Flowers had been accused in the 1996 killings of 4 people in a furniture store in the Winona City, a small city in Mississippi. And among those killed were a 59-year-old store owner and a 16-year-old boy whose part-time job at the store was his first job. Now, the 6 trials of Mr. Flowers, who had worked at the furniture store, took place over more than 2 decades ago. The trial drew attention to the way that black jurors had largely, allegedly, been excluded by a white prosecutor who oversaw all of the trials. Through Mr. Flowers' trials, 61 of the 72 jurors were white. Now, in the Supreme Court's majority opinion last year, Justice Brett M. Kavanaugh wrote that equal justice under law requires a criminal trial free of racial discrimination in the jury selection process. Quote, by pursuing a relentless, determined effort to rid the jury of black individuals, Justice Kavanaugh wrote, the state wanted to try Mr. Flowers ideally before an all-white jury. Mr. Evans recused himself of the case in January, and the Mississippi Attorney General's office took over. Now, in its court filing seeking dismissal of charges, the Attorney General's office suggested that a conviction would be difficult to attain. There is no key prosecution witness that incriminates Mr. Flowers, who is alive and available and has not had multiple conflicting statements in the record, the prosecutors wrote, adding that there were other possible suspects. One of the witnesses who testified against Mr. Flowers was also later convicted of tax fraud and had since died, the prosecutors wrote. And another witness who once claimed that Mr. Flowers had confessed to the crime while in jail later came forth admitting that he had been lying, the prosecutor said. That particular witness was Mr. Odell Hallman, who recanted his story in an interview with the podcast, who eventually played a pivotal role in getting Mr. Flowers free. I believe it was titled In the Dark. Now, that particular podcast, which brought very wide attention to the case and chipped away at some of the original prosecutors' arguments. I'm sorry, I said the wrong name. Everything was all make-believe, Mr. Hallman said in the interview. A spokeswoman for Lynn Fitch, the state's attorney general, said Miss Fitch would not comment on the case out of respect for the families involved. Now, during the earlier trials, prosecutors described Mr. Flowers as a disgruntled former employee of the furniture store who was angry because he had been fired. He was arrested several months after the killings, way in another city and state. A lawyer for Mr. Flowers, Mr. Rob McDuff, said the case against his client never made any sense. And as time went by, even more evidence emerged to corroborate that, and the prosecution was flawed from the beginning and was tainted throughout by racial discrimination. It should have never occurred and lasted far too long. But we are glad it is finally over. So yeah, guys, basically in last night's episode on 60 Minutes, they pretty much began the episode or the coverage on this particular story by starting off by stating that, 60 Minutes has covered a lot of stories about flaws in our criminal justice system over the years, but they had never heard anything quite like the case against Mr. Curtis Flowers, a black man from Mississippi, who of course was tried 6 times for the same crime by the same prosecutor. He might still be on death row if not for the work of a team of reporters from an investigative podcast. And last night, we basically heard from Curtis Flowers and the reporters who helped free him and the prosecutor who relentlessly pursued him for more than 2 decades, who in fact came on in the 60 Minutes interview, guys, and verbally spoke and said that he still believes this man is guilty. So this story all basically began in Winona, Mississippi, back in July 1996, shortly after the Tardy Furniture Store opened for the day. That was the name of the store. There was the store's owner, a bookkeeper, delivery man, and a 16-year-old were shot in the head execution style, and no one saw it happen. So Miss Sharon Alfonsi, who I believe is the reporter who did the interview for 60 Minutes, began by sitting down with Mr. Flowers, asking him a series of questions. And, he begins by telling her how his day went. He said he had worked at Tardy that summer for only 3 days, delivering and fixing furniture. But he was let go after he stopped showing up, almost immediately after the murders. And some of the victims' families suspected that he was involved. So the police questioned him, of course, but they made no arrests. Several months had passed, and Flowers had moved to Texas to live with one of his sisters. So one day he's at his sister's home, and there's a knock on the door. He states that he answers the door, and they explain to him that they had a warrant for his arrest to take him back to Mississippi. When he asks what for, he was then informed that it was for 4 counts of capital murder. So, of course, imagine his shock. Now, Flowers had no criminal record, and you could usually actually find him on stage with his gospel group from church singing. He just had no type of criminal history. He was only 27 years old. They had no murder weapon. There was no DNA or any fingerprints linking him to this crime. But an all-white jury took simply 1 hour to deliberate and convict him. Again, at the age of 27, Curtis Flowers was then sentenced to death and put into the Mississippi State Penitentiary known as Parchman Prison. So you guys, this was so crazy to me. I had to come on and share it and see what you all's thoughts are, because like I said, I had never heard of this story. It was just very shocking to me. Now, also, a little bit about Rob McDuff. He was the attorney who actually helped Mr. Flowers, but then there were 2 ladies involved, Madeline Baran, and then what was the other lady's name? I will be sure to link it because I'm kind of reading notes as I go, guys, but it was Samara Freemark. Basically, it was kind of clear to them. They worked for this investigative small podcast, and it was very clear to them that this story was totally fragmented. It didn't make any sense, and they were determined to get to the bottom of it. So they kind of jumped in, and I believe they started interviewing witnesses, which is where the Clemmy Fleming lady comes into play, because she had testified that she saw Mr. Flowers running away from the furniture store shortly after the murders. And of course, something like that is going to be incredibly damning if the testimony was true, right? And she actually testified to that 6 times. But what these particular podcasters were able to learn is that once it was drilled down, and I guess she was questioned again, she indicated that she wasn't sure about the day she saw him running. She says she knows for sure she did see him running, but she couldn't drill down on the day, whether or not it was the day of the murders. So when Miss Sharon Alfonsi of 60 Minutes asked her during the interview last night, well, why didn't you inform the authorities? She said they didn't want to hear it. They just wanted her to tell what she's seen. They didn't want to worry about the day. And, that's what it was. And so she pretty much went along. But she's now came out and coming on now to this day stating she can't be sure. She knew she wasn't sure then. And it was just very crazy, y'all. Now, the podcast also reported that after Holloman came forward with the fact that his confession was phony, and that he had cut generous deals with prosecutors allegedly for years to avoid punishment for multiple felony charges that he was facing, he also was let free and murdered an additional 3 people himself. So this whole story was crazy. It turned into the podcaster's story, which was titled In the Dark. It blew up. The podcast was downloaded 42 million times, but Curtis Flowers was never allowed to listen to it because, of course, being on death row in the Parchment prison, all he was allowed to do was read the transcripts. So this was a very intriguing story, y'all. Definitely get in there, check it out if you can. I will be sure to try to link all of the sources to where you can follow up on this story even more. But I am just shocked that such a crazy story, such a crazy injustice even occurred, and even more shocked that I've heard very little about it, y'all. This man spent over 23 years in prison for a crime that he simply did not commit. The good news here in this story is that he was recently let out and he is now free, but at 50 years old, he spent over half his life locked up. I'm Pandi, y'all, of Pandi's Hair, Candy, and More. If you all have enjoyed this story, please don't forget to blow dry on my like button for me. I would greatly appreciate it. And if you are not subscribed to this channel, what are you waiting for? Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It is free 99 after all. It doesn't cost you anything. And until next time, you all, stay safe out there, stay encouraged, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.